Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Well, I know. Yeah. Denise explained it.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate you being here. We know that you have many options for your free time in Lawrence, Kansas, so we appreciate you deciding to spend some time with us this evening. The Watkins is pleased to welcome Daniel E. Atkinson. Daniel is an independent scholar who earned his doctorate in ethnomusicology from the University of Washington, where he specialized in Afro-American music and culture. His newly published book, The Rediscovery of George Nash Walker, The Price of Black Stardom in Jim Crow America, is the first biography dedicated to the life and cultural contributions of this actor, writer, and producer who revolutionized Black American theater during the early 20th century. Our exhibit in the spotlight, Lawrence's George Nash Walker, is informed by Daniel's research and features items from his collection. This exhibit will remain on view through April 4th, 2026. We invited Daniel here to speak about Walker and the research that went into his book. Copies of the book will be available for sale and signing by the author afterward. You're also welcome to go up and see the exhibit after the talk. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Daniel Atkinson.
So thank you all for coming. It's so great to see all these folks here, and I'm so glad to be back in Lawrence sharing this information about an amazing Lawrencean and amazing American. But before we get going, I'd like to say thank you to the leadership and the staff at Watkins for believing in the project and for working on this with me it's been quite a while. And there's a few local partners along the way who I'd like to thank. Number one, Sean Klein, who was the engine of all of my knowledge of Lawrence here in the area, and basically what ends up in the book, which basically turns Lawrence into one of the characters of the book. Katie Armitage, who basically produced the basis of the book. She did some work in the 1990s, and she just handed it over to me and said, see what you can do with it, go for it. And that was a really nice basis to go from. And of course, Dr. Bill Tuttle, who can't be here this evening, but he's been a very encouraging force all along the way. And Dr. Jessica Gerschultz as well. I'll bring her back in a little bit later. So I've titled this Lessons from the Ancestors. And we'll talk about my process of how I sort of stumbled into this, because this is not something that I ever thought that I was even capable of doing. But the final product is the most integral thing I've ever done. The first thing in my professional life that I'm actually proud of. And it was a painful process to get to the point to where I learned how to do this. But now that I know how to do it, I'm going to do it until I can't. So before we get going, I would like to give you a little bit of an intro as to my thinking process. And this comes from one of the best storytellers of the 20th century, Mr. Alex Haley. So this is from an interview that he gave just a few months before he passed. And this is something that was really important during my childhood, being raised around elders, my grandparents being next door, and learning the power of my ancestors, them becoming my moral compass, learning about my ancestors through my elders, and seeing myself as a conduit of culture as opposed to a destination of culture.
It's agreed that virtually every residence in this country contained 3 generations under one roof. There was no problem finding babysitters. They were in the house. And another thing, a classic institution, maybe the greatest institution of its kind our nation ever has known. And this had nothing to do with color or religion or whatever. But after the Sunday church service, the family would go out onto the front porch if the weather permitted, or into the living room if it was bad on the front porch. And the whole family would gather around. The seats of honor were just taken, as a matter of fact, by the eldest people present. The grandmothers, the grandfathers, and they would begin to talk. Chiefly it was the men, the grandfathers, who were the storytellers, and they told English stories. And all sat around. I remember this. I don't know if it happened to you in Chicago where you were, but it sure happened to us. You just sit there with your mouth open, listening to your venerated grandfather tell with a measured cadence the stories that had come down. And he might sometimes, if you really wanted a thrill, talk about when he was a boy your age and what happened. You kind of got this vague picture of, my God, we go back to the ark. It sounded like it. And what was really happening on that front porch or in those living rooms, those Sundays, early afternoons of rule, was that the culture of that area was filtering down from the mouths of the elders. There's a saying I like to apply to our elders here as much as where I heard it first. There's a saying in Africa, West Africa anyway, that when an old man dies, and an old woman would be as well, it is as if a library has burned to the ground.
So that's the way I've always operated and have treated my relationships with elders as sacred. Which is why when I moved to Los Angeles in the early 1990s as a jazz musician, I was told that my sound was too traditional, meaning too black, because I didn't sound like the guys who were coming out of the academies. I sounded like somebody who was dead before I was born, but I learned from 78s and from elders sitting next to me. So I spoke the same language that they did. It went through me out into the world. But that wasn't the culture that was around the music at the time. And I knew that there was a problem with that, but I didn't have enough talent to make everyone listen to me, so I had to find other ways. So this brings up the integral question. It's always been a struggle to maintain my sense of integrity. And, you know, far and above learning how to write this book and doing the work over a 10-year period, earning the PhD, learning to converse fluently in Japanese, all those things paled in comparison to my effort as a black man in the United States trying to maintain my integrity, particularly while doing black things like playing jazz music or writing about it or even speaking about it, or just not fitting into some kind of a niche that someone else has worked out for me in my head. And how dare I not be what they expect of me, sort of a thing. So I worked as a jazz musician, a journalist, radio producer, academic, teacher, all kinds of other things, just trying to find a way to fit in, just being myself, my natural self, but always having to deal with someone's thumb on the scale, always having a way to find a workaround, which is quite frustrating. That's fine. And although somewhat successful, my previous work was bittersweet. I could get things through, but it could never be to the level that I thought it should be. Like my dissertation is a classic example. I went to Angola State Penitentiary in southern Louisiana, a former slave plantation where black men pick cotton and work outside, 2 cents an hour, and they call that rehabilitation. And it's a direct interpretation of the 13th Amendment, in which slavery is illegal except as punishment for a crime. So they just made felons out of the 4 million people. They didn't even treat as citizens. And my last name is Atkinson, which is an English name, and on the phone they couldn't tell. So when I got in, I got the look, and they were afraid of me because they didn't know what I was going to do because I wasn't predictably black. And the inmates would speak to me, they'd poke at me a little bit, and then they saw what I was up to, like, oh, And then they give me some more information that I bargained for, but then it put an extra burden on me because I had to help these people who were trapped at the end of a 22-mile dead-end road on 18,000 acres with no access to their families. In a lot of ways, humanity. So in order to protect the integrity of my data, I wrote the most sensitive information in Japanese, which was infuriating to those people. How dare I be unapologetically Black, and how dare I speak a language that they don't understand? So for my second visit, it was 10 months of begging for 3 days of access, and it took a letter from Lonnie Bunch at the Smithsonian to get me back in there. On top of that, for my dissertation committee, everything that I wanted to write the teeth kept getting removed. The potency kept getting removed. I spent so much time explaining myself and my point of view that I never really got around to the meat of the subject. And then at the end, they said, well, why didn't you just say this? I was trying to do the whole time. You forced me to do it this way. It ended up being a 21st century slave narrative. But as a result of this experience, I can go back and fix that. But it's just a shame that I have to go back and fix that because there's so many other things that I want to do. I want to chase another project. So this has led me to ask this question: is Black cultural sovereignty only acceptable when it's institutionally forced? Right? When we were cast aside during Jim Crow, we came up with amazing art, we came up with amazing theater, we came up with amazing everything. We did some remarkable things. And the title of the Public Enemy album, It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back, is for real. We did some amazing things despite all of these impediments. But then if I say that Duke Ellington is Black music, I'm going to catch a lot of hell. And oddly enough, it doesn't happen if you say James Baldwin is Black literature. It just doesn't happen. Both my mother and my brother are literature professors, and they don't seem to have the same issues that I had trying to play jazz music, saying that it was Black music. Nicholas Payton has caught a lot of hell by changing the name of what he does from jazz to Black American music. And it's just keeping us from recognizing our full potential. There's a thumb on the scale. And we're fighting the wrong fight. And so I had to ask this question, like, why is this the way that it is? And ultimately, am I a failure or am I being failed? And this caused a huge mental health problem that I had for years and years and years, just trying to find a way. I know I'm not evil. I know I'm not bad. I don't lie. I don't steal. Why am I in this position? Why is someone making me a project? But by chance, Lawrence, Kansas presented an opportunity in work clothes. Now that's something I learned from Melvin Van Peebles, the filmmaker, when I talked about being frustrated about my experience, and he said, all setbacks are opportunities in work clothes. And I was like, man, I'm World War II cats, man. They always say, And I knew there was work to do. Like, all right. Put on some bibs and go to work. Now, the job that I was hired to do at the University of Kansas wasn't quite what I'd hoped it would be, definitely not what it was on paper. And learning the lessons of my childhood, middle school and high school, I knew that if I'm not actively engaged in something that is challenging me in a positive way, I'm going to start entertaining myself in ways that are only entertaining to me. And if I'm the only one who's entertained, I'm going to get into trouble real quick. It's a snake pit up there, and I work really hard to be a best person. And so, having been a musician from the old school, I learned mostly from 78s and from elders, and so I knew who Bert Williams was. I had about 50 of his 78s, was well aware of him, and I knew who George Walker was because I knew who Williams and Walker was. So George Walker is from Lawrence, Kansas. You know what? I'm just going to start pulling the string on this and see what I can find. So it took me a couple of weeks to find his grave because the city had it in a completely wrong spot. It took me about 2 weeks to find it. And then I started going to the new library to look at the old city directories to find the houses that he lived in to see if they were still there. Then started using my resources at the university to find old newspaper articles, print. And of course, then my good friend, Dr. Jessica Gershels, she started seeing what I was doing and she said, "You're writing a book." No, I'm just doing this mental health thing. I'm just trying to stay engaged so I stay out of trouble. I'm just trying to this. There's nothing's gonna come from this. I'm just learning some stuff about elders and nobody cares. ancestors? It's like, no, you're writing a book. And of course, that was me being defensive, about my writing and just not wanting to put in the works. I knew this is going to be a mountainous task. And I was like, I'm not the one to do it. But then she kept at it, asking me questions that I couldn't answer, that I wanted to answer. So that I started pulling more and more and more trace data in. And ultimately, I ended up with 1,200 single-spaced pages of dictated newsprint over the 20-year period of his activity. Because he made a spectacle and a lot of money, and they were the only Black people doing it, there's a huge trail of information that they left behind. For better or for worse, there's a lot of information out there. So I just started pulling the string. Oh, got ahead of myself. So I started taking baby steps, and it was strictly as a mental health exercise. So I can stay out of trouble, I need to be learning about something. And so this is the only reason why I did it, because I wasn't playing music anymore, so I needed something to occupy that little kid in my head who can't sit still. So of course, I started looking at old maps as well. And you can actually see the streets named on this map. So whenever I would read newsprint about George being chased by a policeman down this street, down that street or whatever, or living on this street, that street or whatever, I could see where it was in relation to the others. And this is before I even went to the city to see the maps. This was fine, this was plenty. Just a few years before he was born. And then of course, all the information about Quantrill's raid, all the information about the battles and the guerrilla warfare, and just people murdering each other on opposite sides of the border for a long time before the Civil War. Just knowing the environment of the fighting spirit that was still in this town at the time of his birth, because he was born in 1872, it was still there. It was all around him. And of course, he was surrounded by people who believed that Black people had potential to be anything and everything. There were people who thought that Black people should not try to aspire to anything, although they thought slavery was abhorrent. And there were people who still thought that Black people should be enslaved. All those people lived here in this area, and he had access to all of those people. On top of that, people who nurtured this precocious young boy who had potential, but was always getting into mischief, but found a way to talk himself into and out of trouble. Like, they liked him, so they kept him around. And he was an enterprising young man. So he set up a bootblack stand at the age of 5 in front of the Eldridge, where his father was a porter. And his father, having been a body man on both sides of the Civil War, was used to being around elite white people. So he picked up a lot of tips on how to speak to people to get what he wanted from his father. And he sold information, shined shoes, he did all kinds of things as a hustler at the age of 5, a really unique individual. And rather than go to school, he went to the school of the streets. So the final product is this book. Again, the most integral thing that I've ever done, mostly because I had, as a jazz musician, been taught to seek community, to bring people in, as many people as possible, to share the wealth, share the data. And ultimately, that's how I would expose myself to be injured. I basically appeared as a nail to be hammered. And so for this, I decided that the philosophy that I was raised to use didn't work. So I just went underground and just was going to find a way to do it myself and not tell anyone what I was doing. Off hours after work, on weekends, phone calls with Dr. Klein, a few other people along the way, and just decided to make a go of it, doing it that way and sort of build the dike. And maybe by the time that those people who put their thumb on the scale are available to do that, there'll be so much inertia behind it, they can't, nor could they steal it, because no one was willing to do the work that I did. Like, you might be smarter than me, you might be a better writer than me, but you're not going to outwork me. It's just not going to happen. So I started with the 6 biographies of Kurt Williams, because there are 6 of them. And George is always included, but only as an aside, as a facilitator of the much more interesting story, which is Kurt Williams. So there's very little of the complexity of George that's included in that. And the first one, well, Dr. Grounds, good to see you. The first one is by Mabel Rowland. This is Son of Laughter. This is the first one that was done a year or two after Bert died. So it's full of testimonials of living history from people who worked with him. That part is remarkable because you get amazing stories from these people talking about Bert Williams and George Walker and some of the things that they did, some little stories here and there, these little vignettes. She ties them together with some things that really aren't to my liking, so I don't really use anything that she wrote, but what I'm using is the testimony of the ancestors. They're speaking for themselves. And I use every opportunity that I can to allow the ancestors to speak for themselves. I have to tie a few things together, and where I don't know what was happening, I make sure that I say that. But for the most part, they provide all the pivot points and the meat of everything. But this is full of really good information that doesn't get used in the subsequent ones for some reason. I'm not sure, but a lot of them are in there speaking their truth. The second is Nobody by Ann Charters. And I knew about her and her offering because her husband, Sam Charters, is a highly respected ethnomusicologist. But like a lot of the English scholars and American scholars of the 1960s who were interested in African-American culture and music, he's really focused almost unhealthily on the link between West African string traditions and the Mississippi Delta tradition. He's not as bad as some. There's one who tries to track culture by tracking the sickle cell gene, and he thinks that somehow is relating to culture, which makes absolutely no sense. And it shows that he doesn't think of us as fully human. She makes quite a few mistakes in it, but she's trying to find a way to make it fit. But the principles of double consciousness does not register outside of the culture very well. So most people who don't understand thinking one way and acting another, they think I lost, but I know I won, and I don't care if they know that I won. They don't really understand that, particularly if the way things are set up are convenient and accessible to them. Like I say, it's very difficult to convince someone to embrace a difficult truth if the lie is beneficial to you. It's so convenient. So she falls victim to that, and I'm not even sure that she knows it because it's her thought process, it's her operating system, right? So there's a lot of mistakes and there's a lot of assumptions about how we think that are just a complete miss. There's a few things in there that are useful because some of the folks were still around when she wrote hers in the 60s. So there's a little bit in there that's useful, but not very much. The first one that's really integral is Eric Liddell Smith's. This is from the late 70s, early 80s. And he's going into the microfilm, he's twisting knobs and dials and coming up with newsprint, and he understands the principles of double consciousness as a Black man, so he knows what's going on. And so he does a really good job of what he had available to him. You know, this is way before things were digitized, and he had to physically be there with hands on paper, twisting knobs. So with the amount of information that was available to him, this is an excellent work, particularly with the context of everything. When bad things happened, he knew why they were happening. But he passed before I started this work, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him, which is a shame. Knowledgeable guy. I read most of what he put out there, and spot on. Now, Dancing in the Dark by Carol Phillips. They make no bones, it's a novel. So he basically he was a Black Brit who learned about Bert Williams in graduate school and decided that he was interested in it and dove in, but he just took what was the pre-existing data, which is inequitable. And so he basically takes these earlier works and pretty much ignores a lot of Eric Liddell Smith, except for they were at this place on this day. But when it comes down to what's going on, the thought processes of having to deal with the institution of minstrelsy and wanting to assert Black liberty in an environment where it's just not permissible, he completely misses the mark and basically turns George Walker into a sex fiend who's obsessed with white women. Which my work showed none of that. And George was particularly associated with Eva Tangway, who was kind of like the Lady Gaga or Madonna of her day with the song I Don't Care. She was kind of a wild woman. And George was associated with her, even though I found absolutely no evidence of them being on the same bill on 2 occasions. Now, in the Schomburg, there is an oral history note where someone named Herschel remarked that Eva Tangway and Bert were very friendly when they were in town together. This is after George's death. So if anything, circumstantially, Bert may be connected with her. And there's other evidence of his his admiration of white people and willing to supplant his true feelings among white people just to get over or seeking their approval. So if anything, it was spirit, but I don't even say that because I don't have definitive proof, so I'm not going to say it. Now, Louis Chuchoquet, The Last Darky. This is a remarkable text where he's trying to get people to understand the process of double consciousness. I mean, people say that my writing is dense. All the stops are pulled out. Very theoretical, very deep. Just he goes in hard. So it's not really accessible to a lot of readers, but I understand what he was trying to do. He was on a mission. And he saw me present out on a panel in Seattle. This is about 2018, 2019. And he stood up in the back and was just sort of, and then when I finished, he just opened up his arms, ran to me, and just squeezed all the air out of me. And he said in my ear, I understand what you're doing. Go and do that. And that's all I needed. Like, thank you, because you're a pretty smart dude, man. So that was all the encouragement that I needed. Very, very smart guy. And I was just very lucky that we just crossed paths. And he's given me a little encouragement along the way, and he's just been a great guy. Now, introducing Bert Williams by Camille Forbes, another thoroughly researched, fantastic book. This is getting close to 20 years old. So she gets in early in the process of digitizing the information from the 19th and early 20th century, but she's twisted knobs, put the hands on paper. This is a very thoroughly researched text. She kind of takes the same trope as some of the earlier ones where George is reduced to a troublemaker and a sort of a one-dimensional character. I don't fault her for that. That's the way that she chose to write her book. And also mine is more chronological than hers. She will squeeze things together as a concept, and then she'll branch off into little tentacles. It's just the way that she chose to tell the story. Excellent book, and she's been encouraging all along the way. It's an excellently researched book. Now, Revolution in 3 Acts. Now, David Hadju is a journalism professor at Columbia, and I want to work with my cousin, who is a comic book artist, a graphic novel artist, I should say, and my older brother, who is a comic book aficionado, to make a graphic novel version of this book to make it more accessible to young readers. Just a quick vignette, and if they want to dive deeper, they can go to the other one, but I'm fine if they take this one. But this one follows the same suit as Ann Charter's in that George is reduced to a troublemaker and a sort of one-dimensional character. And there are a lot of assumptions on the way that Black people think. There are some things in this book that are absolutely abhorrent because there's no way a self-respecting Black person would think in the way that they believe that we think. And they didn't do much consulting on that at all. They just got a few ideas about the peaks and valleys of the story. And they told a story that was really convenient for them, which is frustrating for me because it's not true. It's a good story, but it's not true. And luckily, Michelle Wallace wrote the foreword, and that's Faith Ringgold's daughter. And I sent them an email when I read it and said, you've got this is out of sequence, this is not correct. Why would you think he said that? Where is your proof of this? All these sorts of things. And so then they came back and very angry. Like, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I think that you can do better, so I'm telling you where I know you're wrong because I think you can do better. And it took a lot of back and forth before they realized, no, this isn't an ego thing. These are my ancestors. They should be respected. And if you can't respect them, I'll say it the way my father would say it. If this is the best you can do, then why bother? And so then they tried to sick Michelle Wallace on me without giving her any context. And so then I saw what was happening. I was like, oh, they set her up to fail. So I replied to her, this is what I sent them. This is why I sent it to them. I know that they can do better, but they refuse to do better. They're arguing from a standpoint of comfort. I'm arguing from a standpoint of survival. And she replied to me with 4 words, you know your stuff. It's all I needed to hear. And I let that roadside flower lay where it was and just moved on because I knew that they couldn't undo what I did, what I was doing at the time. So my primary sources, of course, archives. I only made one visit to a large archive. That would be Schomburg and the Schubert Archive as well. It's in Times Square. I applied repeatedly for scholarships that were designed for independent scholars and just got turned down repeatedly. But 6 years in a row, I just stopped applying. And finally, one of the folks on the committee at the Schomburg basically admitted to me that they didn't think I was capable of assimilating the information that I said that I wanted to get in my proposal. So when my brother finished his photography degree in New Jersey, I just showed up and we celebrated, and with the help of J. Rosamond Johnson's granddaughter, I showed up and I took what I needed over the course of 3 days. And I went and found Ada Overton Walker's grave. And went to the hospital where he died in Central Islip. I did all of that. Like, you know, underestimation is my greatest source of power. It always has been and always will be. And I don't care if you think that I can't. I'll do it. And I don't care if you see me do it or if you know that I did it. I know that I did it. But it was interesting because when I went in the reading room where there were lots of white people who were funded to be there. And I went to request some information and the librarian gave me some things. I said, oh, that person's got what you're looking for. When she's finished, I'll just have her bring it over to you. No problem. And I'm going through my materials and she finishes and she comes over and she says, oh, he says that you're doing work on George Walker. What are you doing? She's clutching the materials. Oh, I'm writing the biography of George Walker. Well, you know, he exploited Africans. Oh, okay. Well, you know, I want to make sure that you're writing something that's intended because, you know, he exploited Africans, and so she thought that she was protecting George Walker. She was protecting the Africans, and she was going to protect black people from a black person. And so I calmly let her know that she was basically in the wrong for becoming what she claimed to despise. You are preventing a black person from learning about his ancestors because you think that's the right thing to do. Right? So instead of the rattlesnake in the middle of the road who has enough respect to telegraph their true intention, she's the gingerbread house with the hungry witch inside who wants to eat. And so once she realized, I say, okay, you got to deal with that, but can I have them? Thank you. You know. But I got what I needed and got out. Newsprint, 19th century newsprint. Oh, they could either it's absolutely horrible or it's the funniest thing you've ever they can really weave a story. It's so amazing. Like I kind of miss that this is over because the stories that I have saved so many articles that have absolutely nothing to do with this book just because they were so funny. Memoirs, only 3 from this generation that exist that I know of. This is Tom Fletcher, who wrote 100 Years of the Negro in Show Business, 1952. He was a contemporary of Williams and Walker and lived a very long time and performed at a very high level. I mean, he started off riding around in carts, eventually then trains and airplanes, and was on television. This is Laura Bowman, who joined Williams and Walker at the end of 1902, right before they went on Broadway, and was with them all the way through their London run and decided to stay in England with Pete Hampton, who became her common law husband, and they came back in 1915 because of the war. And she became one of the first black movie stars. A lot of Oscar Micheaux films. And Louis Armstrong did an amazing oral history with her in the early 50s after she had a stroke. He used to travel around with a big open reel trunk and did lots of really solid ethnography because he knew the history and would go find all these elders. So there's an archive in New Jersey that has all this stuff, and it's amazing stuff in there. So she was remarkable, and if this ever gets turned into a period drama, she provides so much information about the inner workings of the company. As a neophyte performer who doesn't quite know what's happening, she tells you her whole process of becoming a seasoned performer and how rehearsals worked and all the petty things that are going on behind closed doors. Her first trip to New York, how the apartments worked, how elevators worked, what restaurants you could go to. She has all that information. And of course, the Johnson brothers, Rosamond and Weldon, who basically provide the most data from that era because of all the memoirs that they wrote, all the articles that they wrote, and just the mountain of information they leave behind at the Beinecke in Yale. Just tons of information from these brothers. And of course, the Vanguard Generation manifestos, the first generation of Black people to apply liberty, they all wrote op-eds, diaries, and most of which survive. This being the most important from George, the real coon on the American stage, where he goes through the whole process of Williams and Walker embracing the moniker of coons just to get through the door, thinking it being a temporary thing before they could really make room to make some money and some cultural wealth. This was the way that he thought was the best way to go. And so he lays out the manifesto. He wrote about 4 during his lifetime, but this one's probably the most important. This one provides most of the pivot points throughout his life. Bert Williams also wrote several, and Ada, George's wife, became a pretty powerful writer in her own right, and it really should have been Williams, Overton, Walker. She was that powerful within the company. She was that important. She was responsible for them elevating things to a very high artistic level. She was classically trained, an excellent dancer, composer, writer. Not much of a singer, but she did get better over time. But in the end, she was better at everything except business than George. And George was known as an excellent dancer, but he paled in comparison to her skill and her ability to show people how to do it. She's an excellent teacher, and she ended up being the company's choreographer, and her mother became the dressmaster. So she handled all the costumes and had an amazing dressmaking shop in Manhattan. But the reason why she's so prominent in this photograph is because just before this dropped, George was caught having an affair with a chorus member. She left the company and was trying to get her own act to go to Europe just to get away from him. And so somehow he was famous for talking his way into things, and somehow he convinced her to stay. And she ended up more powerful than ever, with a feature in every act of every play after that. And she had complete control of the female chorus, and she basically became her own thing and shared very little stage time with the 2 stars. She had her own section of each show. Absolutely remarkable. And of course, the sheet music. This was the very first time that Black people could really make money en masse through intellectual property, through perpetuity. I wrote this song, it took me 2 nights to write. I can print it, and then I'm making a nickel every time somebody buys it in perpetuity. The first one being All Coons Look Alike to Me from Ernest Hogan, which is a proof of concept in 1894, which basically put ragtime on the map outside of the parlors and bars where it normally lived. But they kind of take the teeth out of it. It's got to be repeated the same way over and over again on sheet music by people who understand classical music. So rhythmically, it's not very complex. Lyrically, it's very degrading. It's all about people falling victim to their own inequities. It just basically shows how Black people can't find a way to fit into the wider world. But it's entertaining to watch us fail, right? That's the kind of vibe. And they thought that that was going to be a temporary tactic, but then, gangster rap outsold Music Tongues, my favorite style of hip hop, and there was a reason for that, right? So, but it provides a lot of contextual information. Gussie Davis was one of the best composers from that era, but he died in 1899 of syphilis, which is terminal at the time. But this is as true today as it was 120 years ago, right? Patrice O'Neal had all kinds of jokes about this notion. And it's a joke, but it's also, there's some truth behind it. And as disgusting as it is, this is something that gives people cause to pause, which is what Williams and Walker were trying to do. When people would come to see the real coon on stage, they would implant these little seeds of Black humanity, versions of the Black human condition that could only come from us, that also, if presented in the right way, you could have at least some empathy to say, wow, if I was in that position, that's what I would do. And look how much aplomb, look how much charisma they have as they do that. Because based off of what I'm seeing, they're capable of a lot more than what they're showing, right? And so that's what they were trying to do, planting these seeds going forward. Like Kamau Bell says about Cosby, as horrible as the things that he was convicted of and then absolved of and is still being accused of are, the Cosby Show implanted a seed in people's minds of Black normalcy that cannot be undone for an entire generation. And of course, oral histories. The most important being Yubi Blake, who passed in, I think it was in '83. I was a little kid, and in the late '70s, early '80s, there were all these reviews going back into this era. One Low Time, Sophisticated Ladies, Shuffle Along came back, Ain't Misbehavin', Yubi. There were several of these. And my parents would take us to these sorts of things. We would go, and we had the records, we were all there, so I knew the history behind it. And this stuff bumped just as much as, anything else that we were listening to on the radio from my perspective, which is why I love this older music. And he has so much charisma, and he's so goofy, and he lives so long. And I have, 4 or 5 examples of him telling the same story. And as he gets older, the recall of the current era gets less and less, but his recall of the prior years is dead on and just really locked tight. So he provides so much good information, particularly about the riot of 1902 and how Williams and Walker found a way to protect their mental health as they got back on the stage. They had to perform in front of people, some of the same people who tried to kill them just a week or 2 earlier. And of course, descendants. We'll get to that. So Melania Edwards, she is the granddaughter of Rosamond Johnson. This is the 2 of us at the opening of the Smithsonian. When Lonnie Bunch looked at us, man, where have you been? I was like, you know where I've been. But we were there having a great time. And she's the one who's been pushing me along the way and providing all of these gems of still living history that I have in this book that is in no other book, because most people wouldn't think to ask Black people what we know about ourselves. Me being me, what, really? You don't say. I said, I'm in it. I want to know. I want the dope. So she was with me when we found Ada Overton Walker's grave.
Oh, geez.
And literally, we had to go to the card catalog, get the coordinates. We went to the coordinates, and we had to count the depressions in the soil to find her. And it was a heartbreaking experience because she was a remarkable person. But because she had so little access to the Overton side of her family, her father died when she was 2. I've gotten in touch with the Overtons, and we are working now to get her a headstone. It's taking a little longer than I thought it would, but it's going to happen. They are very capable folks. They're going to get it done, and she deserves better. But she called me from the dedication of the headstone for Sister Rita Jones, the Black Patty, because she too had an unmarked grave for nearly 100 years. And so she left me the greatest voicemail and the greatest amount of encouragement that I listen to it periodically because it just makes me feel so good. So this is Melanie giving me the dope.
Hey Daniel, this is Melanie. I'm here in Rhode Island for the Sister Rita Jones headstone extravaganza. I thought of you because they too had been told, oh, we don't know where she's buried, and oh, there's no headstone. So some pushy lady from California comes to visit and pay homage. She's mad because nobody can tell her anything about where Miss Jones is buried. So the guy heading up the ceremony walks her off onto the grave, the cemetery. She goes in there, pitches a fit, and demands the box, of records. It's an old-fashioned library card system, the drawer with the rod through the middle, the cards have a hole at the bottom. She gets it, she unscrews the back of the drawer, which hadn't occurred to them to do, pulls out all of the cards, and finds where Miss Jones and her mother are buried. Needless to say, they had beggared a headstone from a local carver here who's happy to donate part of his labor. And Miss Jones is going to have a headstone honoring herself and her mother with one of those RQ things on the back so you can take a picture and be sent a link about the Black Patty. Sister Rita Jones. I see great things ahead. Talk to you later. The struggle continues. Bye-bye.
She gave me so much useful information, particularly about the death of Bob Cole, where people thought that he was just a drunk and he drowned himself because he was a hopeless drunk. But really, he saw his best friend, what the ravages of syphilis did to him, and he too was suffering from the same ailment. And at a boarding house, someone walked in and said, "Bob Cole, I thought you were dead," because they had heard some things. He politely excused himself, drowned himself in the river. His mother was sitting right there, and she had just seen him 15 minutes earlier, but he had to go out under his own power. That came from her because she heard it from her grandparents, her grandfather being Bob Cole's partner. And no one ever thought to ask her. One of the most important sources in the period, Sylvester Russell, which you might call a frustrated vocalist turned critic, right? Personifies the notion of those who can't do, those who can't criticize. He's a bit of a stinker. But he joined the Indianapolis Freeman, which is one of the most powerful black papers in the country, 1901. I mean, amazing circulation. The black population in Indianapolis was large and doing things. And when they would come to Indianapolis, it was a fun time for the Williams and Walker Troop, for all the black troops. They were wined and dined. It was balls and all kinds of fun and goofiness. And he was the head critic. And of course, he went ham on everyone. He went in on people. And the interesting thing is, more often than not, he was right. If he had all of the available information, he was right. And usually when he was wrong, he was making an assumption based off of limited information because they didn't like him. They didn't give him anything that they thought he shouldn't have because they thought he was just going to ruin the fun time, or just be a jerk and just blab their private information, because he would do that. So if he was wrong, it was because he didn't have the right information, and he was basically making an assumption based off of a small constellation of information. But because he was so insufferable, physical attacks were common. Common. I found at least 4 that were reported in the newspaper. And kind of asked for it every time. He definitely asked for it. He would get a little personal when he talked about people. But because of his willingness to really speak his mind, he left behind a trove of information that otherwise would have been lost, because all these people were cagey with their information because they knew anything that gets out there is going to be used against me. I described it about a week ago, sort of like if you're fighting a fire and the fire is hot enough and you put water on it, it's being split into hydrogen and oxygen and it's coming back at you, right? So they wanted to prevent that by keeping information from him. They were kind of rude to him. He would show up at performances and they'd say, "How you doing?" and get going. And then spend time with white critics who were a lot kinder, and he'd write about it. He'd really go in on it. And for me, it was really interesting where George would contact the editor of the Indianapolis Freeman, George Knox, who was a friend of his, like, "Hey, call this guy off, because we're gonna have a problem." And of course, Sylvester would declare all the brouhaha over, but then by the end of the article, completely reverse himself and just go and get a few jabs in at the end. Super petty, highly entertaining, and an excellent writer. But in order to tell Nash Walker's story, I had to tell the story of the entire Vanguard generation, and this speaks to the power of Lawrence. For this guy to be at the center of this unprecedented generation of Black achievement, he had to have come from a place like Lawrence, who would sort of nurture his lack of willingness to accept his role, to accept the demerit of being Black. He didn't see it as a demerit. He saw it as an asset and acted as such in every opportunity. An amazing man. For someone who couldn't read up until he was about 20 years old and didn't grow up in a metropolitan city like a lot of the performers he worked with, the whole gaze was on him. He was the ringleader. And a lot of people had troubles with his business decisions. They thought it was too much, too fast, that sort of thing. But none of these things would have happened without him. And of course, after he takes ill and is removed from the scene disappears. And there's no Black presence on Broadway until Shuffle Along with Cecil and Blake until 1922. and it's him. But based off of what's left behind from all of the Burt Williams biographies, you would never know how important he was. Nor would you be able to understand why such a handsome young man who was capable of so many things. Burt was a brilliant actor and a brilliant composer and an excellent dancer. He could have an audience in the palm of his hand where they would sit and wait for him to change his expression, and they would fall to pieces because he was a master. But the only way that he'd be willing to don those corks and turn into a completely different thing than he was the trust and love and respect that he had for his partner, who was setting him up for him to lob him out. And that's why George was never really replaced when he took ill and Burt went away. He didn't have the social courage to do the things that George was willing to do. So in order to tell the story of George, I have to tell the story of the Vanguard generation because they were all working together and he was at the middle of it. Bob Cole, who was the single most talented member of the generation, he's the one who drowned himself and was partners with the Johnson brothers. A remarkable man. Paul Lawrence Dunbar, who was replaced by J. Mordecai Allen from Topeka when he passed. This is Ernest Hogan, who showed the proof of concept that Black people could sell their music. $100,000 in the first 2 years in 1896. There's Will Marion Cook, who was a student of Dvorak and wanted to find a way to elevate Black music at the highest level and do Black operas and things of that nature. And he never quite got to that level, but being from DC, he gave his knowledge to Duke Ellington, who did it for, 60 years? And of course, the Black Patty Cicerita Jones, who was the only Black woman to have a very powerful theater group. She was the only one who was the head of her own troupe. I don't know how she pulled that off, but she did. Oh yes, and the Higher Sisters also lived in Lawrence.
They came.
But all of these people, they basically make this book what it is, and of course Ada, but they make this book what it is. But he was at the center of it, and then when he disappeared, it disappeared. But this is what I hope to be an introduction for people who are genetically similar to me, but culturally different because of the environment that we're forced to exist in. They can go back and see how the first generation did it with no example. So they don't think of themselves as a destination. I own this land that I live on because of this, that, and the other. No, I get mine from someone else and I'm giving it to someone else because I'm going to be dead a lot longer than I'm alive. These people operated with that kind of urgency, and I would like to see that return. And the only way we can do that is if, like Alex Haley said, you learn the stories of your elders and your ancestors to find out we actually do go back to the Ark. So that's all I've got. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'd love to take them. Any questions, or would you like to see the exhibit? That's what we're here for.
I guess I don't know much about your background, what your relationship to Lawrence is. Do you live here? Or do you get here?
Oh, I was the assistant director of the Kansas African Studies Center for almost 2 years.
Okay.
And so when I came here, me being me, I just wanted to learn about the history, knowing about John Brown, Langston Hughes, and Burt Williams. I wanted to learn about George Walker. And that was something I could do by myself and have a little fun, sort of laugh up my sleeve.
I wondered, I may be way off base, but is there any evidence that George Walker was aware of Langston Hughes' mother, Carrie?
Yes, they were friends.
I thought so.
And when he
Did they perform together?
No, but they did, they grew up together. In fact, Nat Turner Langston, her brother, taught George music when he was a kid. And they spent a lot of time together. And then, of course, they were all at
9th Street.
9th Street Baptist Church together, Charles Langston. And then Charles Langston was friends with George's father. Yes.
What does putting a thumb on the scale mean?
Meaning, if I'm on a scale and I'm 100 pounds, someone puts their thumb on it and a little bit, that means I weigh, that's not what my real weight is because they're adding something. Or if you put your foot underneath it, you make me weigh less. Yes.
Where does the Nash come from?
Oh, Nash comes from his father. His father's name is Jerry Nashville Walker. And because his father was so well respected and he had his bootblack stand in front of the Eldridge, he was Little Nash. And so at home, he's Nash. So in the book, whenever he comes home, he's Nash. Everywhere else, he's George.
So when you're talking about the Black critic in Indianapolis,
Yes.
you said he went ham on people?
Oh,
I don't know that acronym.
it means there were no holds barred. He said what he said what he wanted to say and didn't spare anyone's feelings. Sorry, I gotta get that. I spent a lot of time with youngsters. That's
Is that like a contemporary thing?
yes. It's probably a little old by this point.
I'm old. So.
A little old meaning 5-10 years.
In the Indianapolis Freeman at the time, probably most of that stuff was appearing without bylines, right? So how do you identify Sylvester Russell's? Is his voice so distinctive that you know that's
Oh, no. He wants everyone to know that it's him saying it because he referred to himself as the preeminent critic.
Okay.
He wanted everyone to know that this is coming from him.
And was it actually in there with the byline?
Mhm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Because some writers were better than others, right? And they wanted to distinguish themselves because some were not so good. He was an excellent writer. Yes.
Were you surprised? I guess I thought when Ada died, she got buried in New York.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't come to be buried next to her husband.
No, she's buried with her people. She was from New York. She was a New Yorker. And basically towards the end of the relationship, it was probably more of an agreement than an actual marriage. Because when she takes ill and she's dying, and they know she's dying, and they ask her if there's anything she wants, she says, no, just mama, and she's waiting for me. She didn't mention him.
It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I just, yeah.
Mm-hmm. She did visit once after he passed, because she took care of George's mother.
Yes. Well, and she contributed flowers and stuff like that. I read in the local paper, there were thank yous as far as at the funeral and the flowers and all that. And,
But she's definitely with her people. Her mother, her grandmother, and her father's probably buried there too. But he died in 1882, and the records aren't.
So I think I want to buy your book.
What a relief.
But you mentioned that your writing's a little dense and such, and I appreciate that. A man like me, a Midwest white guy from Lawrence, Kansas, what do you expect me to get from you?
The density is for people. The density is there so that people who who don't quite understand the thought process that we don't discuss, we keep it to ourselves, so that you understand the weight of it. And even though it's the first time you're seeing it, it sort of explains it without taking the teeth out of it. So it's dense for the first 3 or 4 chapters, and then after that, it's a sprint to the end. But I need you to understand the difference between ragtime music as sold versus ragtime as lived. The way that the musicians who needed the merit to keep their jobs played, as opposed to, I'm going to sell this to people who can't tell the difference because it's better to earn my money this way than digging a ditch. And so there's a lot of that, and I just want to make sure that people who would rather rely on the convenience of the way that they think because it works for them, I want to take as much of that ability away as possible, just with information. Not calling anybody any names or doing anything derogatory. I'm just giving you the information the same way Williams and Walker did, except they were more subversive by calling themselves coons, but then coming out in tuxedos, right? It's just a lot of information, like drinking from a fire hose to some extent.
For the first 3 chapters.
Yes, just the beginning. And then after that, once the concepts are there, the characters come and go.
All right, I'm looking for good stories.
And it's entertaining. There's all these little vignettes where it's like, all these little things that I find, these adventures that they go on, these mishaps, petty grievances amongst each other. It's pretty funny.
I've been researching George himself. I moved into a house across from this.
Oh, okay.
And when I found out that house was owned by a black vaudevillian, I said, damn, I bought the wrong house. I'm a variety performer as well.
Oh, okay. The inside of that house is stunning. It's all mahogany in there.
It's a very nice house. But I fashioned my own performance on old vaudeville acts. And stuff.
Okay.
I was just so enamored that he was there. Anyway,
Stand in the back.
Oh, I was just curious what the next project is and if it's a trajectory from this research or you want something completely new.
Well, I have a mountain of data that's not used in the book, and the book's full of little rabbit holes, and I'm waiting for hungry young scholars to track me down who are willing to do that. And to keep them from reinventing the wheel, I'll just give it to them so that they can go off and do something else. And then that way, when it comes back to me, I learn something. Right, that's the way the people who taught me how to play music, that's the way I'm going to operate. Particularly Ada, she needs her own book.
I agree.
She really needs her own book, and I'm waiting for the right environment to sort of hand that off to the right person because she's absolutely remarkable and she needs more. But Bob Cole needs a book, and yeah, there's several of them, and there's people who just come in and out and play a very small role in a book who also could have their own book. And so anyone who reads it, they can see where there are these little locked doors, these little rabbit holes, and there's all the information is there. I show you where the information is, and you can dive in and find for yourself.
Did you find a lot on Jane Ward Allen?
Not a whole lot, but there's quite a bit, and that's the next thing that I'm working on because his poetry book is out there in Topeka, so I want to re-release that. And I have a short biography that I've been preparing of him. But really, now that I know how to do it, because this is the first thing that I've ever done that I'm actually proud of that doesn't have any stains on it from people who don't matter beyond their ability to gatekeep or purchase it or hide it, I'm going to go back and fix my dissertation. It was failed. And now that I know how to do it, I can fix it. Even though most of the elders I worked with, this is at Angola State Penitentiary in southern Louisiana, former slave plantation. Even though most of the elders are gone, I still have quite a bit of information from a few of them after they were released. And a lot of the guys who were my age are now out. So I could go back and have a much more frank conversation with them. I'm going to be in New Orleans at a folk conference in January, and I've already set up appointments with several of them to sit down at Giacomo's, my favorite restaurant, and we're going to chop it up and figure out what we're going to do next. And again, it's not about the income, it's about the outcome. I need to fix it. Those people deserve better. These remarkable people that no one will ever see. Yes, sir.
The Japanese influence on you, did that have any effect on your understanding of your topic? And how did you get into Japanese?
My first wife was Japanese. We spoke very little English in the home. And I absolutely adored her mother. And if I wanted to speak to her, I had to learn the language. And their house was a couple hundred years old. They had a room in the house for the tea ceremony. They all did kendo. Her family was samurai class. And the Shinto shrine across the street from her house had a rock with her family's crest on it that was over 800 years old. But like Black people, they embrace the chaos of the world around them to know that it doesn't define them. There's two aesthetic principles called Iki and Wabi Sabi, which is basically you can't choose your situation, but you can choose how you react. And if you experience the Kabuki theater, things of that nature, it's all about the fleetingness, the temporariness of life. So celebrate every single moment because it could be your last, and you will be dead longer than you're alive. And it's all about respecting yourself, respecting the people around you and the environment in which you operate. And so because of that, there's a lot of principles that really apply to Black aesthetics and blues. And just the ability to recognize who you are in the situation, the original meaning of the word woke, understanding who you are in the context of the situation that you have to operate. Not the four-letter word that's thrown back at us as a talking point because people who don't understand it took advantage of it and wrecked it, which is what typically happens. And that's what happened with the cakewalk and with ragtime music. And it's been happening over and over again. It's why we have to reinvent the wheel every 20 years.
Right. Thank you. Curious.